Scenes by Lorenzo Angeloni in conversation with Shobhaa Day at AU Bank Samvad.
Good evening, everybody. It's just fantastic to be back in Jaipur and at the Jaipur Lit Fest. Every year I come and discover something new, and this year the new element is Samvad, where we are. It just shows how the festival has grown and the enthusiastic response of not just the city of Jaipur, but readers from across the world who flock here to hear some of the best voices, the best thinkers, the best of the best minds. So it's with enormous pleasure that I will be in conversation with a wonderful gentleman from Italy. I devoured his book very quickly and absorbed it because it's a book that has lots of introspection, which he will tell us about. So, Mr. Ambassador, I want to start by asking you, behind my scenes, the motivation for writing a story on heartbreak. Did you experience one yourself when you wrote it?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here in Jaipur. For me, it's the first time. Very happy to be close to the best of the best. Heartbreak, I think, is something that we experience sooner or later. In our life, so can be during our youth, can be during our adult life. So heartbreak is inescapable experience for everybody. So I mean, yes, but of course, what I try to describe in this novel, it's not my personal experience, rather than the observation of how things going on in many different couples, friends, and people that I had the pleasure and the venture to meet.
Well, I often lie and say the same thing when people ask me whether my books are about my own life. So I'm not asking for a public confession. It's fine. I loved the book. That's important. I'm sure a lot of your readers must have given you that feedback. The interesting thing about the book for me was normally a subject like this, which is very emotional and very sentimental, is seen from the perspective of women, and heartbreak somehow is also associated with women, as if their hearts break more than the hearts of men. But he has just turned that whole thing around, and he's talked about heartbreak as seen from a man's perspective. I found that extremely interesting. And there's a line here which I'd like to read out. Never has love or a relationship appeared so challenging. Perhaps what we need is silence.
Well, it's true that men seems to usually come out from a relationship in an easier way, no? I mean, just maybe jumping in another story. But I think that men are just as fragile as women when they experience an heartbreak. And I thought was interesting to have a male voice introspecting on things and issues that usually are on the female side. So that was the idea. And the other idea was also to have the two main characters of the story as a mature person. Because I think that, and this is another point that I wanted to bring in the story, I think that love being in love, I prefer to say being in love than falling in love, or maybe we can say even rising in love. It's not only a youth prerogative. It's not only this. I mean, you can being in love at every age. So the idea was to bring together these two aspects and to introspect a little bit.
Because the protagonists, Giorgio and Mickey, in the book, maybe I'm mispronouncing her name.
No, it's right.
It's okay.
It's right. It's right.
So both of them are parents of young children, and at some point in the relationship, that does become a big issue. And I know there are other love stories based on more mature people, married and with children, and the big conflict that do you opt for love and yourself and your own future devoid of the children, or do you make that emotional compromise? So you've dealt with it very delicately, but at the end of it all, it seemed to me as a reader that the lady had more of the conflicts than the gentleman.
My intention was not to apportion blame. So, I mean, my intention was to offer a cross-section of a modern story, a contemporary story, a couple of stories. So, I mean, people that nowadays are confronted with a number of problems, practical problems, but also showing this from the emotional side. Yeah. So showing what happened from the magic awakening of love till the painful experience of when you start the real knowledge of a person. So showing a cross-section of this. This was the idea to bring in the novel.
There are wonderful lines in the book. For example, this one, where when you say, what we call love is nothing but a form of weakness and often of slavery. True love is liberty. True love allows us to see the loved person as they truly are. So when your protagonists experience this true love, there's so much pain in that process.
Yeah, because the path from love to pain that I was referring before, it's not an easy path, but the even most difficult part is what happened afterward. Yeah. So what kind of choice we have after experiencing pain? I mean, I refer to deep pain in a relationship. No, yes. Either you stay in or you opt out, but usually heartbreak means that the relation is over. Yes. And when it's over, I see usually two main dynamics that people, I mean, just go towards them. So first of all is the dynamics of falling in depression, which is very bad for the health, first of all. And second is the dynamic of jumping in another love story, yes. Which is maybe not so bad for health, but it's not so good for personal growth. It's not so good to remake the same film, no? Yeah. And the idea of all this pain and the reflection on that is just to sketch a possible third way out, yes. No? I mean, not depression, not repetition, but just the way of using this experience to know yourself better. To know yourself better, which is, I think, the possible way out of this situation.
You've had a very interesting career as a diplomat. You've had some very challenging, fascinating postings, Vietnam, Algeria, and Sudan. And you talked about conflict and violence and maybe love in the times of conflict, pain, and violence. How different is it?
Place from another one, you mean? Or the
you're in a... Your book is, of course, set in Rome, and Rome becomes almost a character. Yes. Every street of Rome has a story to tell, and a story which is a part of your love story. But in all these postings, what have you observed? How do people interact in difficult times? Is love the first victim?
No. I wouldn't say that. I think that love can arise in any situation. I mean, there are some of the most celebrated novel on love, which are exactly, trying to show how tragic situation can also lead to love. You know, for instance, one of my favorite novel is The English Patient.
Oh, yes.
So there you have two war-damaged souls
Yes.
that they meet, and it's a huge, fantastic love. I remember people, colleague telling me that in Beirut during the difficult years, the life was very lively, so people want to live anyway their life, their feelings, their sentiments. So I wouldn't say that love is damaged necessarily in a situation of war. Of course, when we are talking of war, of course, we know that life can change dramatically, so I mean, it's under different angle.
Do books make good ambassadors?
Two books makes good ambassadors.
Books, are they good ambassadors?
Well, I would say something more than good ambassadors. So I mean, a good book, a good novel, may be inspiring. So you can, at least to me, it happens sometimes that reading a novel, I could just put in order some ideas that were confused. Just reading a paragraph, where these ideas that were confused in my head, suddenly they were, I mean, shining or taking their place. I think that books, novel especially, because novels are windows on the real world. Okay, you can define. This morning I was listening to a discussion on autofiction, non-fiction, and fiction.
Yeah.
But I think that every novel is a window on the real world, and that allow you to see and to look at the experience. So I mean, that's the most important thing of novel.
You've been in India for 3 years, and India is known for its celebration, or it used to be known for its celebration of love, romance, mythology, various forms of expressing love, often through our, not just our scriptures and through our paintings, through the miniatures, through every possible medium. It was a celebration of love and of eroticism, somewhat like Italy. Do you see those parallels and those connections?
I see a lot of parallels and connections because, of course, love is a universal theme, but we have really, I'm not saying this because, I mean, I'm here, but I keep saying since my very first day in India. So we have such a number of similarities, you know, in the way we are being passionate. No, I mean, of course, there are, I mean, you can find passionate people in every country of the world, but the way we start being passionate, express our passion, no, the way we speak loud many times, you know, the way we speak over another. So I mean, sometimes, and I mean, so we are really very, very similar. I see a lot of similarities in love and food and family. So in the pillar, if you want, no, in the pillar of the society. So I mean, the pillar of the society are built of the same material, I think, in Italy and in India.
And we have Mama's boys, just as you have them back in Italy. It's a society that really adores the male child. And I find that every time I've been to Italy, I've noticed the difference between ourselves on some levels, but the biggest bond and similarity has been when I see in a restaurant an Italian mother feeding her son. She could be in a large group, lots of children, lots of daughters, but her entire focus will be on feeding her son. We see something very similar in India as well. Now, coming back to the book, there are passages which leave a kind of open-ended sentiment, and I think it's part of your literary, perhaps it was a deliberate way of leaving things somewhat incomplete. Was that a device, Or did you do it like a stream of consciousness?
No, it was something on purpose. So I decided from the beginning I was not interested in writing a love story with an happy ending or with an ending. So because there are plenty. I mean, so of course every writer will tell you, you know, I try to do or to write something different. So I listen in these days many times to this statement, you know, from other authors. So I don't know if this is different, but I wanted to avoid any ending, and to do that, I brought the end at the beginning of the story. So in order to be clear, so I mean, with the readers, so what is it and what they can find in the story.
And you made it so explicitly clear that it's also that segment begins with the end. So that was a very intriguing, very, very intriguing way of structuring a book. You must have had an editor who was completely in sync with you. Did that happen? Because it really helps writers and authors if they're in sync with their publishers and editors. How has your experience been?
No, we were absolutely in sync. No, they didn't question anything. On the contrary, the English version is richer than the Italian, not only for the picture, which are nice to have some pictures of Rome, because this is another point of the novel. The novel is very introspective. So Rome, you cannot see Rome through the lines. So that's why they suggested to put some picture. You can just imagine Rome. But I guess that you all guys, you were in Rome at least one time.
Yeah.
So, but you have also some picture that can help you to familiarize with the place.
You have a shortish passage which I'd like to share. With a golden marker, I write the word codependence on the black notebook. It had filled up over those 5 days. Without much noticing, I add, who knows, and underline the question. I skipped through it, reading casually some of the notes. So very often when I'm in the process of reading it, the male-female voice kept getting exchanged. For me, as a reader, was that also part of the literary device? Sometimes I wondered, is it her saying it? Is it him saying it? Is it him saying it through her voice, for her, and so on? How did you arrive at that technique?
Because I wanted to show that these two human beings, two persons, they were so close.
Yeah.
They got to be so close that to let imagine now the separation could be painful. So I mean, so there is a first part of the first side after the end, the first side of the novel that describe in a literary way how love can be awakening. And this things that you just spotted was conceived in order to show the proximity, if you want, of these two people in that period of their life.
And when they separate, you also talk about that how many things can only be grasped once they're over. So that is a very sad kind of a statement. It's reflective, but maybe true of most heartbreaks, that when you're in love, in a very passionate relationship, you don't have the distance. It's only when you look back.
Yes. Well, this is part of the human condition. So not to know before what is happening afterwards. And I think that we have to go through all this experience and to arrive to a place which is called afterward, where you look back. So, but that begins maybe the new page of life, if you manage to look back and to take lessons in the new page of your life.
So, Mr. Ambassador, what I found also very interesting is that you've done very different books earlier. So why such a passionate love story at this point in your life? What was the trigger?
I think that every author of novels has topics that interested him, attract him, and sometimes torment him. So I mean, it's a sort of permanent curiosity. You cannot leave a subject. So the subject, without entering too much in details, the subject that tormented me in this way was the a relation of couple, the war, and how to tackle war, and why war is keep happening, even if so absurd, and the encounter between richness, extreme richness, and extreme poverty. Encounter, I mean the physical places where they intersect together. So these three, topics were always fascinating me. At a certain moment, I came up with this, even if I wrote before one inspired by the idea of tackling war. So there is no succession idea. But this was one of my, the topic that keep tormenting me during my life as an author.
Was it cathartic? Have you got it out of your system? Are you still tormented?
Well, no, I consider myself very lucky, so I'm very happy to be here in India. I'm the ambassador of Italy, by the way, as you put it before. When I arrived here, presented my credential to the President of India, I said that I was considering myself lucky to spend a period in a country that has such a huge variety of culture, experience, and messages, for the mankind. And after 3 years, I have to say, yes, I confirm this. I'm very happy to have 1 more year to stay here. I don't have specific cathartic experience, but I work on myself as a human being. I experience it, as I told you, the heartbreak. The novel is not a confession, it's an exploration of the human life. But at the same time, it offers, as I said before, a possibility of a glimpse of different way out from heartbreak.
You know, when I was reading it, when it was towards the end of the book, I felt that there was about women and choices. The lady in the book is a female diplomat. She takes a difficult assignment where she leaves the gentleman or offers for him to take a sabbatical and come to Africa with her. It's not what he wants for himself. He's not even sure whether that's what she wants in reality. And I got the impression there was a bit of a conflict or judgment about women making career choices of that kind in a fairly cold-blooded way. Did I read it right? Is that the intention?
No, not was the intention at all. So, I mean, the story refer to my professional environment, where we are now used to have women as a colleague.
Yes.
And again, as an observer, I know that there are a lot of colleagues that are a couple, so that they have, for them it's not easy to be posted in the same place.
Yes.
So, and this was referring just to that. So, there's no...
But difficult choices. Normally,
Yeah.
a diplomat who's a gentleman, the wife would automatically follow. I don't think there'd be too much of a conflict even between the couple. But here it seems as if the choice of her, the choice she makes is somehow seen as being a choice made by a woman who's more career obsessed and giving less importance to the love of her life. Did I read it wrong?
No, only because in the story, she's the first to leave Rome. So, that was the reason why. So, creating this gap, this huge gap, because of course, if you go to Africa and you remain to Rome, so it's a bit difficult to keep going together.
So thank you, Mr. Ambassador. That was a lovely, beautiful session. I loved the book. We have time for just one question. So, because the next panel is right here. So, Mr. Ambassador will take that one question, and it's from the front row right there.
Ambassador, I had the pleasure of reading your book. Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of reading your book. It's quite extraordinary, and it's a great short read, but a very, very different, unusual read. I highly recommend it. I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned the human condition. Now, you as a diplomat, being posted in so many different countries, how's that a study of the human condition? And then how do you journey towards being a writer and then look at the human condition?
Yes. Well, let's say that for a diplomat, it's easy to be a writer because we are used to reporting. And actually, I started publishing essays and reportage. But the first leap forward, let's say, seen from my angle, was when I decided to transform a reportage I had already written at the end of my mandate in Sudan. Sudan was crisis, refugees, war. This was the matter, the material. I decided to transform it into a novel because I wanted to reach out in a wider way. I want to talk to young people. I want to talk to people that maybe they didn't know Sudan. They didn't know what was happening there. So, I mean, this was actually a non-fiction novel. And how I finally get to write a story like this, you can call it a love story, or you can call it a story of personal growth through a love story, as I prefer. But anyway, look at the embassies, foreign policy, diplomacy, all that is called international relations. But you have the word relations there. So, of course, relations between institutions, but institutions are made of people. And in these last years, I observed that many leaders, including your Prime Minister, they are using, sort of diplomacy of direct contact, no? We call it, in the case of Prime Minister Modi, the hugging diplomacy. But what is it? Is to feel comfortable with the presence of another person irrespective of the role, having sympathy. So, and we are getting closer to feelings. And then, of course, as a diplomat, we have to spot also in our interlocutors fears, conditioning, resistance. And, I mean, it's a tool to have the capability of interacting also on the mood and perceptions. So that's why I see as many things are converging in our era. So, I mean, I see a convergence there. I see a positive convergence between these two aspects of my personal life and many other people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Big round of applause. Beautiful book. Highly recommended. Let's call it a Valentine's Day gift.
Lorenzo Angeloni, spectacular Shobhaa Day. Mr. Ambassador will be available to sign your copies of his book at the book signing area in the back.